I never imagined I'd be caught up in something like this, yet here I am. A few hired toughs showed up at my farm thinking they could scare me into joining their HOA. What they didn't expect was Rex, my trusted K9 trained to protect, or the shotgun I've kept for years, always ready to defend my home and family. And just when I thought things couldn't get any more surreal, the sheriff pulled in. Suddenly the tables turned, and they were the ones in deep trouble. Truth is, you couldn't make this up if you tried. Tell me, what would you have done in my place? Would you have backed off, or would you have stood your ground and fought, tooth and nail to protect what's yours? The first thing that struck me wasn't the crash of my gate being torn apart. It was the silence that followed. Just moments before, my dairy cows had been lowing softly in the pasture, that soothing, nighttime hum that always lulled me to rest. Then, nothing. An eerie stillness that raised the hairs on my arms. This land has been in my family for 3 generations. Every step on this soil feels like a piece of my father's heart etched into it. Every fence post, every acre carries sweat, sacrifice, and memories no one can strip away. That dead silence after the impact wasn't just quiet. It was as if the farm itself was bracing for something terrible. My pulse quickened, palms damp as I slipped on my boots and headed toward the door, already knowing this wasn't some ordinary, late-night disturbance. Through the bedroom window, I caught the glare of headlights slicing through the dark by my front gate. They swept side to side, harsh and invasive, like searchlights. Rex's low growl erupted into a full-throated bark, his fur bristling as though he sensed the danger even more keenly than I did. I didn't need a clear view to understand the threat. Rex's instincts were enough. He's been my partner for 5 years, trained to guard the farm and livestock. The way his muscles tightened and his hackles stood was all the confirmation I needed. This wasn't a drill. This was real. Then came the splintering crack of wood. My gate, the one I'd built with my own hands just 3 summers ago, was being destroyed. The cows panicked, their frightened bellows filling the night as they scattered, hooves pounding the earth. And then, a sound that froze me where I stood. A calf's sharp cry of pain, followed by a hollow quiet that spoke of injury. Rage surged through me, hot and consuming. I pulled my shotgun from the cabinet, checked the chamber, and stepped into the cold night air. The metallic tang of blood carried on the wind. One of my animals had been hurt. Rex sprinted ahead, powerful legs propelling him toward the chaos. I followed, gravel crunching under my boots as the floodlights snapped on, bathing the yard in unforgiving white. What I saw twisted my stomach. 3 men in dark clothes stood amid the wreckage of my gate. One gripped a crowbar, still littered, with fresh splinters. The scene looked like a war zone, my gate sagging at an angle, one hinge ripped out, shards of wood and metal scattered across the drive. In the pasture, the herd huddled in fear against the far fence. Near the gate, a calf lay bleeding, its leg gashed by jagged metal in the stampede. The sight ignited a protective fury in me. Rex lunged toward the man with the crowbar, swift and precise. His training kicked in, low, fast, eyes locked on his target's legs. One of the intruders panicked, stumbling back as Rex closed the distance. He dropped something from his pocket before scrambling toward a dark SUV parked beyond the fence, cursing as he ran. Rex held the property line, every muscle coiled, refusing to chase him off the land but making it clear the fight wasn't over. I raised my shotgun, the weight of it heavy in my hands, heart hammering in my chest. One step forward, one pull of the trigger. That's all it would take to show them I'd never surrender this land without a battle. Something on the ground caught my eye in the floodlight. A wallet tossed open where it had fallen. Inside was a driver's license and a few papers. The name, Marcus Webb. But it wasn't the name that mattered most. It was the folded receipt tucked behind his cards. A bank transfer. The payer? Meadowbrook Heights, HOA. The other 2 men were retreating fast now, unnerved by Rex's fierce stance and my presence with the shotgun. Under the bright light, I memorized their faces. One, older, maybe in his 50s, with a gray beard and anxious eyes. The other, younger, mid-30s, marked by a long scar down his left cheek. I lifted my shotgun and let off a warning blast into the night sky, the sound ripping across the pasture like rolling thunder. When I finally spoke, my voice came out, steadier than I actually felt. "Get off my land," I shouted, the cold air carrying my words farther than I expected, "and tell whoever sent you that Sam Grady doesn't scare easy." The intruders bolted for their SUV, doors slamming shut, engine roaring as they tore off into the darkness. I stood rooted in place, surveying the wreckage they left behind. My gait was splintered, a calf limped from a fresh injury, and my herd was shaken to the core. But none of that churned my stomach the way that receipt in the wallet did. Veronica Sloan. She'd been hounding folks in the area for months, pushing them into her homeowners association. I crouched beside the calf, examining the wound along its leg. Shallow, thank God, but still in need of cleaning and bandaging. Rex padded over, settling down beside me, his breathing slowing as the night's terror faded. Mine hadn't yet. The adrenaline drained from my veins, leaving me jittery and drained. By morning, I'd need to call the vet, file a police report, and figure out how to replace that gate. But questions gnawed at me while I worked. Why sneak? In after dark? What did they gain by wrecking and scaring? That's when I spotted something half buried in the dirt. A leather wallet. Inside was a driver's license, Marcus Webb. The name didn't rattle me. The receipt tucked behind it did. A payment for property assessment. The HOA's fingerprints were all over this. And now I knew. They weren't just circling for land. They were circling me. Whether last night was just the first move or the whole plan, I couldn't tell. Morning brought no comfort, only a harsher look at the damage. My coffee went cold in my hands as I studied what remained of the gate. Hinges ripped straight from the posts, jagged holes where they'd once held firm. Splintered wood littered 20 feet of driveway. Every time my eyes fell on it, anger. Clenched my jaw tight. The herd stayed huddled near the barn, too rattled to graze. My calf limped badly, despite the 40 minutes I'd spent before sunrise washing and wrapping the wound. And I knew the vet bill would cut deep. This wasn't just about broken property anymore. Blood had been drawn. Innocent animals hurt, all to send me a message. I was taking measurements for replacement posts when a voice drifted over the fence. "You all right, Sam? Heard something last night." I told my neighbor the short of it, and his face hardened. "That Sloan woman's been sniffing around here too, trying to rope us in." Not an hour later, the purr of a high-end engine announced a visitor. A spotless white BMW eased to a stop just outside my property line, chrome flashing in the sun. The driver's door swung open, and out stepped a woman who looked like she belonged on a real estate billboard. Perfect hair, navy blazer, heels worth more than a month's feed. Veronica Sloan. She strode toward me with the confidence of someone who'd never once been told no. A leather briefcase swung from one hand, a thick folder from the other. Her smile was all polish, none of it reaching her eyes. She offered me the contract with the same grace someone might pass a bread basket, but the weight behind it was clear. Sign, or be marked an outsider. What unsettled me most was how her gaze skimmed over my ruined gate with zero surprise. Like, she'd expected it. I needed to defend my farm, but also my name. "Mr. Grady," she called sweetly, her tone laced with condescension. "I heard about the unfortunate incident last night. As I glanced through the contract, my stomach tightened. Every line read like a rope tightening around my throat. I didn't open it right away. Instead, I studied her face. Blankly professional, but her eyes carried a sharp calculation that made my skin crawl. "Security, huh?" I said slowly. "Funny thing, the only security issue I've had lately showed up right before you did. Quite the coincidence. This wasn't a simple agreement, it was an ultimatum. Sign away my freedom or resist and risk everything." Veronica laughed, brittle, sharp, like glass snapping. "Mr. Grady, surely you don't think our association would stoop to vandalism. We exist to prevent exactly that through oversight and standards." She waved dismissively toward my land. "Places like this, unmanaged, invite the wrong kind of attention. That's just the reality of rural property." Neighbors had whispered the same thing. some unsure, some already caved, trading their independence for safety. I flipped through the first pages, my eyebrows climbing higher with every clause. $300 in monthly dues. Strict. Appearance requirements. Mandatory certification for agricultural operations. They wanted control over everything, from the paint on my barn to the way I bred cattle. And buried on page 12 was the real kicker. Exclusive distribution rights. Every drop of dairy from member farms would be funneled through HOA approved. Channels only? This wasn't about community, it was about control. They weren't just asking for dues. What they wanted was control over my entire way of life, deciding who I could sell my milk to and on what conditions. It was economic bondage. Dressed up in legal jargon. "This is some contract?" I muttered, shutting the folder and sliding it back across to her. "Why don't you just take the barn keys while you're at it?" My sarcasm bounced right off her polished exterior. If anything, her grin widened, sharper and more predatory than before. She was clearly used to pushback and had methods. "Ready to cut through it?" Veronica's tone hardened as she tucked the paperwork back into her briefcase. "Mr. Grady, I think you're missing the value of what we're offering. Homes in HOA communities consistently sell for more than those in unregulated areas. Your neighbors who've already joined are seeing real increases in their property." "Values?" "And if I don't sign?" I asked, though I already had a good idea of her answer. Her smile turned icy, giving me a glimpse of the iron beneath her polished veneer. This wasn't a pitch, it was an ultimatum wrapped in corporate courtesy. "Well," she said, casually adjusting her briefcase strap, "let's just say non-members sometimes struggle to keep relationships with local suppliers and service providers. The dairy business is built on trust and reputation. It would be unfortunate if doubts about your quality made your milk harder to sell." My fists clenched at my sides. She was openly threatening to cut me off from my own customers, to ruin the reputation I'd built over decades with whispered rumors. The audacity of it left me momentarily speechless. There she stood beside my busted gate, endangering my livelihood and acting like she was offering me a gift. Veronica slipped back into her BMW, leaving me in a haze of expensive exhaust. I spent the rest of the afternoon picking up the pieces. The vet confirmed what I already suspected about the calf's injury. The insurance man documented the damage to the gate, and I filed a police report. By evening, I was drained and frustrated, but at least the day's events were officially recorded. It wasn't until I stopped at the mailbox on my way in for dinner that I noticed it, something that hadn't been there earlier. A small piece of notebook paper, folded tight. My hands trembled slightly as I unfolded it, eyes scanning the rushed handwriting. "Don't sell your milk tomorrow. It's been poisoned." The letters were jagged, nervous, like someone scribbling while looking over their shoulder. No name, no clue who had left it, or when. But the timing made my blood run cold. Someone knew about Veronica's visit, knew the pressure I was under, and was warning me about something far worse. I stared down at the note, a fire sparking in my chest for the first time. "This isn't about signing or not signing," I muttered. "This is about survival, and you're not taking me down that easy." Still, I couldn't tell if the message was a warning or a trap. That night, sleep never came. By sunrise, I had made up my mind. I'd test the milk. Poisoned or not, I needed proof. I drew samples from 3 tanks, sealed them in sterile containers, and planned to drive them to the Agricultural Extension Office for analysis. That's when I spotted them. A convoy of 5 vehicles rolled up the drive like some official inspection. Team. About 15 people piled out, doors slamming in unison. I recognized a couple faces. HOA members who'd been leaning on other farmers. At the front, Veronica climbed from the lead car, clipboard in hand, wearing new clothes but the same predatory smile. "Mr. Grady," she called out, voice raised so everyone could hear. "We're here for the community health assessment. I mentioned might be necessary." I didn't recall her mentioning any such thing, but before I could respond, she was already ordering her group toward my barn. "Given yesterday's security concerns," she added smoothly, "we felt it wise to ensure all dairy operations are meeting proper safety standards. I followed, Rex at my side, as they spread through the barn like they owned it. Most of them clearly had no idea what they were looking at, nodding solemnly as Veronica gestured at equipment, but one woman lingered by the feed bins, fumbling with a small container. When she caught me watching, she hurriedly shoved it into her purse and moved on. Then came the sound that froze my blood. A distressed cry from the milking stalls. Bessie, one of my strongest cows, was staggering. Her breaths ragged, a thick white foam spilling from her mouth. Her eyes were glazed, unfocused. My chest tightened as I rushed to her side. She'd been fine just an hour earlier at feeding. Now she was barely holding herself upright, legs trembling, mouth frothing. It was too precise, too sudden. This wasn't. Just illness. Something had been triggered. My hands shook as I checked her pulse, uneven, erratic, but still there. I couldn't figure out what was wrong with her, only that something serious was unfolding right there in front of the crowd. "I should call the vet," I muttered, mostly to myself. "Oh, my word," Veronica declared, her voice booming through the barn. "This poor animal is clearly in the middle of a medical crisis. Everyone, please keep your distance for safety." She whipped out her phone and began snapping photos of Bessie, making sure to capture the foam dripping from her mouth. Before I could even reach for my own phone to contact the veterinarian, Veronica had already seized control of the situation. "Due to this obvious emergency," she proclaimed, "I'm declaring this facility temporarily unsafe for public entry." I had no idea what authority she thought she possessed, but her followers clearly believed her. Their murmurs swelled, and I could already see a few of them posting on their phones. "Hold on just a second," I said, standing up and brushing my palms against my jeans. "You can't just stroll onto my property and start making announcements. Who told you you had that kind of power?" But Veronica wasn't listening. She was already shepherding her group toward the exit. One woman, who had been near the feed storage, kept her eyes down as she hurried past me. Their convoy drove off, leaving a haze of dust hanging in the morning light. I stayed with Bessie and called the vet myself. By the time he showed up, 40 minutes later, her symptoms had vanished. No foam, no labored breathing, and she was steady on her feet again. He gave her a thorough exam, but couldn't pinpoint a cause for what I'd described. "Might have been an allergic reaction," he said as he packed up his bag. The timing unsettled him just as much as it did me. The rest of my morning was spent trying to put out fires over the phone, but in a small rural community, news, especially bad news, travels fast. Customers started calling to cancel their milk orders. A woman who had been buying from me for over 10 years sounded truly distressed as she explained she'd heard my cows were sick. The grocery store manager left me a voicemail saying they'd have to suspend our contract until the situation was resolved. In less than 4 hours after that so-called inspection, my customer base was unraveling. Friends and neighbors I'd known for years were suddenly treating me like I was running a diseased farm, all because of one unexplained episode that lasted under an hour. By late afternoon, I was fielding calls from other farmers asking if the rumors were true. Word had already spread to the co-op, the feed store, even the bank that held my farm loan. A woman from the co-op called sounding sincerely worried, asking if I needed assistance with quarantine protocols. The dominoes were falling faster than I could pick them up. I tried phoning loyal customers back, explaining that the vet had found nothing wrong and that all of our milk had tested clean. But once suspicion takes root, it's hard to rip out. Most were courteous but firm about waiting until everything was settled. Some didn't bother returning my calls at all. That evening I stood in the quiet barn, watching my healthy cows graze peacefully outside and felt the full weight of Veronica's campaign. This wasn't about HOA membership anymore. She was dismantling my livelihood, pitting my neighbors against me with staged crises, and it all felt too deliberate. The powder near the water trough, the perfect timing, this wasn't random. Someone had orchestrated it. Every thread led right back to Veronica. Frustration boiling over, I kicked at a loose board on the barn floor. "What's next?" I thought bitterly. "Permits for every moo?" She was playing a rigged game, and every time I thought I understood the rules, they changed. That's when I spotted it. a small vial, half buried under the hay. Not dust, something far more dangerous. Someone had intentionally tried to sicken my cows, and I knew exactly who stood to gain. I held the vial in my hand, realizing this wasn't just sabotage, it was a warning. Tires crunched on the gravel outside, and I knew I was being watched. If one cow's episode could cause this much chaos, what would happen when they escalated? The milk test results came back clean, just as I'd known they would. No poison, no contamination. No explanation for what had happened to Bessie, but by that point, it didn't make any difference. The rumor mill had already chewed me up and spat me out, leaving my name in ruins. I spent most of that morning drafting a letter to the livestock auction asking for quotes to sell off my whole herd. Writing those words felt like forcing down broken glass, but I couldn't imagine another way forward. Rex wandered into the kitchen as I wrestled with the letter, dropping something at my feet. It was a metal bolt about 3 inches long, the threads marked with fresh scratches. I'd never seen it before, and it definitely didn't come from any of my equipment. Rex wagged his tail proudly and led me outside toward the pump house. Like he'd just solved a riddle. That's when I noticed the pump wasn't running. The cover over the main mechanism had been tampered with, bolts missing from the access panel. When I opened it up, I saw at once that vital parts had been deliberately loosened. The intake valve was barely attached, and the pressure regulator had been cranked to dangerous levels. If the pump had kept running like that, it would have destroyed itself within hours, leaving my cattle with no water. I was still bent over the damaged machinery when I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. Sheriff Robert Hayes stepped out of his patrol car, face calm but eyes sharp. He was a broad-shouldered man in his 50s, his hair graying, his skin weathered from years of settling rural disputes. I'd known him in passing for years, but today he carried himself with a no-nonsense seriousness. "Sam," he said, tipping his hat, "got some paperwork yesterday about trouble out here. Thought I'd stop in and see for myself." The way he worded it made me wonder what kind of paperwork he'd received, and from whom. His voice was civil but cautious, like he was trying to put together a puzzle with missing pieces. I showed him the pump, pointing out the stripped bolts and deliberate damage. Hayes studied it carefully, snapping pictures and jotting notes in a small pad. But when I mentioned the fake inspection and Veronica's threats, his expression turned pensive instead of dismissive. "Miss Sloan did file some complaints," he admitted slowly. "Concerns about farm safety regulations. But this kind of equipment damage, this is something else." "You think I'd sabotage my own farm?" I shot back, motioning at the pump. "You think I'd wreck my own livelihood just for attention?" Hayes turned the bolt Rex had found over in his hand. "Thing is, Sam, this isn't clumsy work. Whoever did this knew machinery. They knew exactly which parts to loosen for maximum damage without immediate failure." Before I could respond, voices drifted from the direction of my pasture. Too many voices for that part of the property. Hayes and I headed over. The sight that met us made my throat tighten with fury. 3 men with cameras were circling my herd, while a 4th lingered by the fence. They weren't just filming, they were staging a scene. One man jabbed a stick at my cows, trying to make them look restless or sick. Another sprinkled white powder near the water trough, setting up a false image of contamination. The whole performance was designed to create damning footage, painting my farm as hazardous and unfit. The moment they noticed us, they scrambled to pack up their gear. Rex didn't give them the chance. He bolted toward the fence line. Instincts. Flaring at the strangers harassing his herd. One of the cameramen tried to backpedal, but Rex was faster. The expensive camera flew out of his hands and landed in a muddy puddle with a splash that made my heart sing. The man cursed, but Sheriff Hayes was already striding forward, one hand resting near his radio. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying authority, "care to explain what you're doing on private property without permission?" The men stammered excuses about documentation and public safety, but their story unraveled fast when Hayes pointed out their lack of ID or legal standing. He took their names and sent them packing. I fished the ruined camera from the mud. The memory card still worked, and flipping through it, I saw exactly what I'd expected. Dozens of staged photos shot from angles that made normal wear look like neglect, shots meant to suggest contamination that wasn't there. The last images clearly showed the powder being scattered at the trough. Hayes studied the pictures, his interest sharpening. Paired with the sabotaged pump, someone had been out there for hours, silent, patient, observing. The precision of the watch made it clear. This wasn't idle curiosity. As dusk crept in and I walked back toward the house, I couldn't stop checking the tree line behind me. The weight of unseen eyes pressed down, though I spotted no one. Rex felt it too. He stuck unusually close, occasionally turning his head toward the woods as if confirming what I already feared. The farm suddenly felt exposed, defenseless in a way I had never experienced. I couldn't tell if I'd finally unmasked the trick or walked straight into another one. The town hall meeting was set for 7 o'clock, but by 6:30 the lot was already overflowing. I'd never seen a turnout like this for a routine HOA meeting. That alone told me exactly what tonight was really about. Cars lined both sides of Main Street while neighbors gathered in tense little groups, whispering. As I drew near, conversations died mid-sentence. Rumors were moving faster than I could hope to chase them down. I wasn't just protecting my farm, I was defending my name. 2 battles at once. Inside, the room buzzed with a sharp, nervous energy. Folding chairs faced a long table up front where Veronica sat, sorting papers with the smug anticipation of someone ready to land a final blow. She looked the part. Crisp white blouse, dark tailored suit, hair pulled tight in a way that broadcast authority. I slipped into a seat near the back, trying to blend in, but Rex's loyal shadow beside me might as well have been a spotlight. Veronica rapped the gavel, her voice cutting easily across the crowded room. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming. We have serious community safety issues to address tonight, and I thought it best everyone hear the facts directly. The way she stressed facts sent a cold ripple down my spine. She gestured to a man at the far end of the table, unfamiliar to me. Navy blazer, leather portfolio, polished demeanor. Mr. Thompson represents the Community Health Assessment Board. His findings are deeply troubling. The so-called inspector rose, speaking with the smooth confidence of someone well-practiced in public presentations. He wove through terms like contamination protocols, livestock monitoring, and regulatory compliance. His jargon carried just enough weight to sound legitimate, but stayed conveniently vague. The crowd nodded, impressed. But something didn't sit right. When he spoke about bacterial testing, his explanation didn't align with veterinary standards I knew well. His timeline for infection spread was off too, yet delivered with practiced authority, it was convincing enough for most. I stood. Mr. Thompson, I called, loud enough to silence the room. Which specific pathogens did your tests find on my property? All eyes snapped to me. The inspector faltered, glancing nervously toward Veronica. Well, the preliminary assessments suggest possible vectors of contamination requiring further review. We're still awaiting lab confirmation. His confidence cracked. That's when Emily Carter, my neighbor 2 farms over, rose from the middle row, phone in hand, concern etched on her face. I need to show everyone something before this goes further. The room hushed as she held her phone high. A grainy video played, figures scattering white powder near my water troughs, their voices faint but discussing timing and coordination. I filmed this a few days ago, Emily explained. At the time I assumed they were county workers, but after all this talk about health issues, I thought people should see it. The video ended. Whispers erupted. Veronica's confident mask cracked, shifting into calculation. That footage is taken out of context, she insisted, rising. Routine safety testing often involves materials that can appear suspicious. Half the crowd seemed swayed. The other half, mostly farmers, looked doubtful. Real testing didn't involve secretive figures spreading powder in the dark. The room fractured, and Veronica seemed to welcome it. Division worked in her favor. But this wasn't just about destroying my farm. She was trying to destroy me. Her allies in the media, her lies whispered into the community. Everywhere I turned, she was there, tightening the noose. Meanwhile, the so-called inspector quietly gathered his papers. I'm afraid I have another engagement, he muttered, avoiding eye contact as he slipped out. His sudden exit didn't go unnoticed. Murmurs of doubt rippled through the audience. Then Veronica made her fatal misstep. Instead of keeping control, she lashed out. "This man is a danger to our community," she shouted, pointing directly at me. "His negligence has already triggered one livestock crisis, and his refusal to take responsibility puts everyone of us at risk." The room erupted. Shouts, arguments, demands for proof, cries for action. Veronica's temper boiled over. "If he won't meet community standards," she shrieked above the din, "then we'll make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of operation he's running." Her rage stripped away the polished image, revealing the venom beneath. Even her supporters recoiled. The meeting dissolved into chaos as people streamed toward the exits, some crowding around Emily to ask about the video, others poring over. The inspectors abandoned documents with growing suspicion. Neighbors were choosing sides, and the split was obvious now. My phone buzzed relentlessly, not with concern, but with accusations. People questioned my honesty, my practices, my integrity. As the room emptied, Veronica approached. Her smile was gone, replaced with something colder. "You think you gained something tonight," she murmured, voice sharp as ice. "You have no idea what you've set in motion." She leaned in closer. "You just signed your own death warrant." Soon after, an anonymous letter arrived, warning me to leave town, or face consequences. A threat or a promise? I couldn't tell. But morning brought something far worse. Every cow in my pasture, 37 in total, stood stripped of its ear tags, not torn or fallen off, but cleanly severed, one by one, with surgical precision. I froze at the fence, coffee mug slipping from my hand. Without those tags, my herd was legally untraceable. No creamery would take milk from untagged animals, no matter how healthy. It was strangulation disguised as vandalism. Right on schedule, the milk truck arrived. The driver's smile vanished as he spotted the untagged herd. "Sam, what happened? You know I can't haul milk from unidentified cattle." He was already making notes. Within an hour, phones rang nonstop. Neighbors called, but their tone carried suspicion, not sympathy. Some wondered if I'd stripped the tags myself to conceal disease. Others suggested I was plotting illegal sales. It wasn't just financial ruin. They were painting me as a criminal. I spent the morning in a bureaucratic nightmare with the Department of Agriculture. Replacement tags would take weeks, buried, under paperwork, certifications, and inspections I couldn't afford. By noon, 3 milk buyers had canceled their contracts. Sitting at my kitchen table, staring at a blank sheet of paper, I tried to write to the auction house. My farm, my name, my livelihood, everything was slipping away. The words refused to come. Selling my herd felt like surrender, yet holding on to them meant draining what was left of my savings while waiting for red tape to crawl forward. Twice I picked up the phone to call Sheriff Hayes, and twice I set it back down. What could he really do about stolen ear tags? I almost dialed a lawyer when Rex broke into frantic barking near the old equipment shed. His tone carried that sharp urgency he only used when something mattered. I followed his cries. Across the yard, Rex was digging at a stack of worn feed sacks pushed against the shed wall, whining and shooting me glances like he was begging me to understand. When I pulled the bags away, I uncovered a canvas sack stuffed with something that clattered when I lifted it. My hands trembled as I unzipped it and found dozens of ear tags inside, tags with the exact number sequences from my cattle. They hadn't been destroyed. They'd been deliberately collected and hidden, kept as leverage or proof. Each tag had been removed with surgical precision, the cuts clean and consistent. This wasn't the handiwork of kids or vandals, someone with veterinary training or access to professional tools had stripped every marker from my herd. The planning and skill involved were far beyond the petty harassment I'd been blaming on locals. Fresh footprints marked the dirt around the shed, leading from the hiding spot to a vantage point with a perfect view of my barn and house. Whoever did this had been close enough to watch my reaction. The thought made my chest tighten with rage. I crumpled the auction house letter and hurled it across the kitchen, watching the fragments scatter like the remnants of my hopes for normalcy. This wasn't harassment anymore. It was a calculated attempt to dismantle my livelihood. They didn't just want me frightened. They wanted me erased. Jake Morrison's number was still saved in my contacts from college, though I hadn't spoken to him in 5 years. Calling him felt like admitting I couldn't handle this myself. I stared at the phone for 10 long minutes, cycling through other options until finally admitting I had none. Sam. Damn, it's been ages. What's going on? Jake's warm enthusiasm hit me like a lifeline. I laid everything out, every break-in, every threat, the missing tags. For 20 minutes I talked while he quietly listened, scribbling notes in the background. "This isn't random harassment," Jake said once I finished. "This looks like organized extortion disguised as activism. The escalation, the fake paperwork, the financial chokehold, it's deliberate. Someone's running a professional operation to drive you out." Hearing him confirm what I feared made the danger feel both heavier and oddly hopeful. Jake promised to drive down that weekend, to collect statements and evidence. "If this is half as serious as it sounds, it's headline news," he said. "People need to know this kind of corruption is happening in rural America." For the first time in weeks, I felt the faint relief of knowing I wasn't alone. As we wrapped up, Jake mentioned he'd already dug into Veronica Sloane's background. "Her resume doesn't add up," he said. "Conflicting job history, sketchy financial records. She's been doing this elsewhere. I'm almost sure of it." The thought that Veronica had run this same scheme in other towns made my stomach turn. Looking out at my herd grazing without their tags, I knew she wouldn't back down quietly. She'd already escalated further than I'd imagined possible. Her words from the night before echoed, and I wondered what someone desperate enough to strip tags from cattle would do when threatened with exposure. When the knock came that night, Rex launched toward the door, growling. I grabbed my shotgun, heart pounding, unsure whether I was about to greet an old ally or the people watching me from the shadows. The knock landed precisely at midnight, followed by the slam of car doors and heavy boots on my porch. Rex's hackles stood like bristles, his teeth bared. Whatever this was, it wasn't friendly. I dialed Sheriff Hayes's emergency line, shotgun in hand, and peered through the window. Veronica stood there, flanked by 4 men who clearly weren't volunteers. These were hired enforcers, the type you paid to get things done without paperwork. She smiled, but it was a mask stretched over something sinister. Her men spread across the porch in smooth, practiced motions, cutting off exits. Veronica raised papers in the air. "Mr. Grady!" she shouted. "I have a court order for immediate inspection due to agricultural violations." Her tone was theatrical, like the town meeting, but I heard desperation under the polish. I kept the chain locked and answered through the crack. "Veronica, court orders don't get served at midnight, and they sure don't come with muscle. You've crossed the line." 2 of her men edged toward my windows. Rex reacted first. The German Shepherd rocketed through the doorway like a missile, slamming into one man and locking his jaws on the man's forearm. Screams cut through the night. Another thug staggered back, completely unprepared for a trained dog. I stepped onto the porch and fired a warning shot into the sky. The thunderous blast echoed over the farm. My shotgun wasn't for show. I had nothing left to lose. Next. "One goes lower," I said coldly. The air went still. The thugs hesitated, weighing their pay against their lives. Veronica shouted for them to subdue Rex and disarm me, but none moved. The man Rex had pinned was bleeding and cursing, scrambling to crawl away. "Those papers better be real," I warned, gesturing toward her trembling hands, "because Sheriff Hayes is on his way." Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Veronica shoved the documents toward me, her earlier bravado shattered. They looked official, stamps, seals, dense legal text. But under the porch light, the flaws revealed themselves. The paper was too fresh, the details inconsistent. Then headlights swept the yard. Patrol cars arrived, Sheriff Hayes stepping out with authority radiating from every motion. Jake climbed out too, camera rolling. "Miss Sloane," Hayes called, "I'll be needing those documents, and your men need to step back from Mr. Grady's." Property. Now, with backup present, compliance wasn't optional. Hayes examined the so-called court order, pointing out irregularities. Wrong formatting, forged signatures, non-existent procedures. Word of last night's showdown spread through town like wildfire, each retelling making the story even more dramatic. By sunrise, neighbors were calling to make sure I was safe, and reporters were already asking for interviews about what they were dubbing the HOA takedown. Around 10 a.m., a federal agent arrived, looking like she'd been on this case for months, not hours. She spent 3 solid hours questioning me about every detail of Veronica's scheme, compiling what she described as a rock-solid case file meant to secure convictions across the entire criminal network. The scope of it all was staggering. We've identified more than 80 victims in 6 states, she explained, flipping through her notes. The financial losses topped $3 million, with some families even losing their homes. Your resistance and the records you kept gave us the breakthrough we needed to tie everything together. Hearing that my fight had helped shield other families made every hardship worth it. The investigation uncovered a far more sophisticated operation than I'd ever imagined. Veronica had set up shell companies, forged credentials, and even hired actors to pull off variations of the same scam in rural towns across the country. The so-called health inspector, the hired muscle, even some of the supposed HOA supporters, turns out they were paid performers recruited online. Later that afternoon, Sheriff Hayes dropped by with news from the arrests that followed the raid. "The guy Rex took down gave us everything," he said, leaning back in my kitchen chair with clear satisfaction. Bank records, communication logs, playbooks, the whole enterprise. They kept detailed files on every victim and every stolen dollar. The community's reaction was immediate and heartfelt. A longtime customer showed up with a homemade apple pie and tears in her eyes, apologizing for ever doubting me. The grocery store manager personally reinstated our contract, even adding a premium to make up for the lost business. 3 feed suppliers offered credit extensions, and the co-op voted to waive my membership fees for the rest of the year. Emily Carter went a step further, organizing what she called a neighborhood appreciation dinner. Families brought casseroles and desserts, turning it into a celebration of the end of Veronica's reign. Before long, it became a full town meeting where residents planned a real neighborhood watch built on trust and cooperation instead of fear. Jake's article dominated Sunday's front page, complete with photos of the forged court documents and interviews with victims from other states. The headline read, "Federal Bust Ends Multi-State Extortion Ring." The report was so thorough it looked destined for journalism awards. By Monday, the story had gone national, but the most satisfying moment came when a convoy of federal agents rolled in to arrest the rest of Veronica's crew. From my freshly repaired front gate, I watched as they hauled away the surveillance team, the document forgers, and the coordinators who'd been running similar scams in nearby counties. Justice was finally happening on a scale I'd never dreamed of. The Department of Agriculture fast-tracked my tag replacement paperwork and even sent a letter of commendation for my role in exposing agricultural fraud. The local vet offered free care for my entire herd, while the State Agricultural Extension Office asked to use my farm as a model for legitimate safety practices. Meanwhile, Rex became a local legend. Kids from the elementary school came just to pet the hero dog who'd helped catch the criminals. The paper even ran a feature on police dogs and farm security, with Rex front and center as proof of how working animals protect rural life. He seemed to enjoy the extra attention, though he never lost focus on guarding the herd. 2 weeks after Veronica's arrest, I received an official letter from the federal prosecutor's office. The organization had been completely dismantled. Assets were being seized to repay victims, and the main defendants faced 10 to 25 years in federal prison. The nightmare was officially over. One of the most touching moments came when the elementary school kids visited with their teacher. They brought cookies shaped like cows and hand-drawn pictures of Rex. Their teacher explained that my story had become part of a class lesson on standing up to bullies and the power of community. That simple gesture meant more than any government award. That evening, standing on my porch with the sun setting and my cows grazing peacefully, new ear tags glinting in the fading light, I thought about how far things had come. What once felt like devastating attacks now looked like stepping stones in a bigger fight for justice. Every time Veronica pushed harder, she handed over more evidence that sealed her downfall. The fake HOA signs were gone, replaced with genuine welcome banners that reflected the true spirit of rural life. Neighbors were reconnecting, supporting each other, and making sure no one would ever be exploited like that again. Sheriff Hayes stopped by one last time, returning property that had been held as evidence. "You've done something remarkable." "Here, Sam," he said, shaking my hand with genuine respect. "Most people would have just signed whatever was put in front of them and hoped for the best. Your courage took down an operation that was tearing families apart across multiple states. That night I settled into my chair, Rex lying at my feet, my herd safely penned in. I thought about the title of this whole saga. They had sent thugs to intimidate me, but instead they ran into Rex, my shotgun, the sheriff, and eventually the full force of federal law enforcement. That unlikely combination was enough to bring down an entire criminal enterprise. The irony wasn't lost on me. Veronica's arrogance was her undoing. If she'd stopped after her first attempts, she might have succeeded. But her constant escalation gave law enforcement all the evidence they needed. That final stunt with the forged federal documents, that was the unraveling of everything. They tried to break me with threats. I answered with Rex and a shotgun blast in the air. When the sheriff stepped in, the whole rotten operation collapsed. That was the price they paid for underestimating a farmer protecting his land. If you're still here, I'd love to know your thoughts. What would you have done in my boots? If you enjoyed this story and want to support the channel, hit that little super thanks button below. Stay strong and never back down when it comes to defending what's yours. Catch you next time. That's a wrap from QA Stories, but stick around. There's plenty more drama, twists, and unbelievable stories headed your way.